Y'all ready to be history?
Get started.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
To the Pro Audio Suite.
These guys are professional. They're motivated.
Thanks to TriBooth, the best vocal booth for home or on-the-road voice recording. Introducing Robert Marshall from Source Elements and Someone Audio Post, Chicago. Darren Robbo Robertson from Voodoo Radio Imaging, Sydney. Tech to the VO stars. George the Tech Whittam from LA. And me, Andrew Peters, voiceover talent and home studio guy.
Line up, ladies!
Here we go.
And welcome to another Pro Audio Suite, and we're happy to announce we have a brand new sponsor. The TriBooth is our new sponsor. Thank you, Rick. Rick's also been kind enough to offer a discount. With the discount code, you can save $200 off your TriBooth if you use the discount code PAP200. Cool.
PAP 200.
PAP 200.
There you go. Hey, you're a big fan of the TriBooth. You've got one, right?
I've got one. Yes, I have, and I think they're terrific. I love it. In
Well, there you
fact,
go.
I'll be taking it with me on my trip to Byron Bay next month.
Nice. Look forward to heaing how well it works.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be good. I can't wait to get to Byron Bay, quite frankly.
That's right. And more importantly,
that's another story.
what cables you'll be using.
Talking cables, that's what we're featuring on this episode of the Pro Audio Suite. Cables.
No one wants to talk about laying cables. That's disgusting.
Yeah, I sort of...
I
hinted
thought it was
at that.
sending
You just,
cables.
Crossed the line, of course.
You mean telegrams?
No,
No,
cables.
no.
Laying a cable. You know, when you go to the bathroom, you've got to lay a cable. No one wants to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a story with Mark Hamill I saw on an interview a while ago where he was talking about, he goes, there's telephones, telegrams and telecarry. If you want news to get out, you tell Carrie Fisher. I thought it was really quite funny.
Nice.
Yeah, good one.
Who needs enemies when you got friends like that, right? Yeah. Beautiful.
Who needs a press release or
Yes.
a PR agent? So how important are cables? This is the question.
Well,
We all talk about microphones and interfaces and
we can't
preamps.
work without them, right? So, you know.
True.
No.
You need to get the cables that have the electrons that only go in one direction. They're very important to get those cables.
The directional audio cables, yeah.
The directional audio
If you Google
cables,
that, and you
by
will
all
actually
means.
find those.
Is that like a left-handed?
Really?
Is that like a left-handed screwdriver or something like that?
It's for audiophiles who buy into that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's like the craziest non-science science that's like
Pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start. I'll be completely honest here in that I've not been that caring about many cables, except for the mic cable. Most people only have one. They have one mic cable, they have one mic, and that is not a thing to cheap out on if that's your livelihood. But what does cheap out mean? You don't have to buy the $100 whiz bang cable that's being oversold or overpriced at the music store, because that's really where these companies make their profit, is on cables, let's be honest. And you probably don't want the cheapest store brand cable with the molded plastic, connectors either. You kind of want the Goldilocks. To me, the Goldilocks cables in the US at least are the Mogami cables. They have Mogami Silver, they have Mogami Gold. Either one is fine. But I tend to look for cables that are made with the Mogami cable with like a Neutrik connector on the ends. And if you can find those between $30 and $50 US for a mic, a typical like 15, 20-foot mic cable. I think if you're spending much more than that, you just don't need to be spending more than that.
Yeah.
So that's for mic cables.
I make my own from Canary Starquad.
Canary Starquad is fantastic stuff.
Yeah, and Neutrik connectors.
So explain real fast what Starquad means.
Starquad is 4 internal wires, so you double on everything, and
a shield.
And shielded. Yeah.
So the shield is that metal mesh that encircles the other cables, other wires or conductors on the inside, and there's
like Starquad is a style of cable. It's not like
a brand.
a company makes Starquad.
Right. It's a style of cable, right? And
Yep. Just
if you
clarifying that.
your mic cable, if you work in an area that has a very high percentage of RF interference, let's say you're in a city. Let's say there's a transmitter tower, and let's say you can hear literally conversation on your recordings.
Yes.
because there's a transmitter somewhere nearby and
Yes.
it's being picked up, then you probably want star quad mic cables. They will reject more RFI.
And also, if you've got a mobile phone with you, it's
Well,
always
yeah,
kind of,
right.
yeah.
You're exactly right. Everybody has a radio that's causing interference all the time, and that's called a cell phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you work with an iPad in your booth, then you probably want Star Quad in there.
No, you're probably right. I would love to have the wherewithal to do a real cable test in a real world, going through a different prices and qualities of cables and see how it affects the noise floor of the actual recording. Because
I think that it doesn't make, like, I've used a lot of Star Quad, especially when I do mobile remotes for like an orchestra where you are 200 feet away from all your mics and you're running really long mic runs. Like, Star Quad for sure is there. To me, a lot of it with mic cables isn't as much, I mean, you want a good number of strands, but I don't buy into like our metal conducts better than their metal. It's like, it's all the electrons are gonna flow, and you can get some incredibly cheap stuff that only has like 2 strands of wires, like you find in like a headphone cable. And no, you shouldn't use that. You shouldn't go that cheap. But I don't think that it's really about like Star Quad or a certain brand of cable. It's just it needs to have a certain gauge so that you have enough strands. And then beyond that, it's, if it's going to be a cable, it's going to be plugged into a rack and not touched for years. Like, honestly, you could get away with some cheap knockoff connector. But if it's going to be the cable that's in and out of your bag, plugged in, out, plugged in, pulled,
rolled up,
et cetera, for its whole life, rolled up, uncoiled, then you want a good quality cable with good ends that have good shock,
strain relief.
Strain relief, because that's where the cable is going to show its value, is in it not breaking. But I think if it's just decent cable, like the next thing about Megami and Canary and these other companies is sometimes they make just as great a cable, but it's super bendable and much more flexible and takes less space. Whereas the same company who makes a cable half the price at the same gauge, whatever, their shielding and their rubber and everything else is thicker, and the cable is just not as supple. And that's sometimes what you're paying for, is just the, how well it coils up and what quality, using it.
I used to have all
is.
these road hog cables that were very thick, but I liked them because they were exactly like you said. They were supple. They coiled really easily. They were just easy to deal with, right? And then I had a whole bunch of Whirlwind mic cables, which had a very stiff jacket. So they were a pain, right?
Yeah.
They both worked perfectly fine. But one was just easier to deal with. But, in the context of our listeners, most people are not roadies or doing live shows.
They're not dealing with 300-foot cables. You're like,
Yeah.
But in Chicago, we have Gepco, we had Clark Wire, and so sometimes, especially if you're ordering locally, because it can be shipping,
Yes,
and
that's
other
right,
factors like that.
Yeah.
If you're wiring up a whole studio, it can help to buy local.
I just find it really therapeutic to make my own cables. And
solder.
get a bit of... Yes, exactly.
How about solderless connectors? Have you ever used the solderless ones that, they just basically...
they clamp, yeah.
They sort of clamp and press in. Yeah. Have you ever used those?
No.
You put these pins, and instead of soldering, you put a pin on the end of the cable and you crimp it down.
Yep.
And we were working a project, and we were trying to work with some pre-made cables, so one half of the end was already done for us. The cable was so thin that the thing could not crimp around it.
I just kept sliding out.
Like, it is like
maybe they were
slid
Belden
through the crimp.
Belden.
I think they were Hosa.
Or Hosa. Okay.
Yeah.
I believe Hosa. Hosa's pretty inexpensive.
Yeah, Hosa's
right?
considered like it's like the one that when you go to the music store and they have a rack with about 100 different cables with red packaging, it's probably Hosa. And
Is
they're
Hosa
moderate to cheap quality mostly.
It's kind of true. When you see the ones that have the molded ends, there's probably some cheap cable in there. And one of the main reasons is because you can't even open it up and see.
Right.
At least it has an
It's not
end you can unscrew
serviceable.
the end.
You
You're like,
can't take it apart. You can't
Yeah.
fix it really. You can chop it apart and re-strip it and re-terminate it and put new connectors. But you can't do much.
Right, and you're trying to strip a cable that has like a huge surround and like 3 wires in there, and every time you strip it, you cut one of the 3 wires that you have.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Proco has ended up being pretty okay, and some other companies that seem like they're budget companies, but
Proco,
they just use decent
Rapco.
cable.
Yeah.
Rapco, yeah.
What do you
Andrew,
guys
you were
use
saying
down in
something?
Australia?
I don't think we make our own
I don't think we do.
cable.
No.
Oh, you got to.
Well, daily
I don't
after a
think- like,
coffee,
no one wants
I
to
make
ship
one,
that much.
but that's about it.
Zinger, you're not going to let that one go.
No.
But
Well, I did.
I was going to say, Robert, is I think you just did. I'm going to say, Robert, is Hoser Canadian?
I don't know.
That took a while to sink in.
It took a second, didn't it?
For anyone listening,
that
that's
would be
an
Jose.
in-joke. Sorry. Yes.
Hosa?
I don't know. Is there anything that you should completely avoid? I would generally avoid anything with molded connectors that have a plastic
Yep.
sleeve.
Unless you have a very particular purpose for them. Things that
Anything
can
that-
just be like plugged in and left for 100 years.
Well, do they make
You know,
any
it's like-
unshielded cables anymore? Is that something else we should avoid?
Yeah.
For speakers, right? Aren't speaker cables unshielded? You sometimes want unshielded cables. But I would say that like the number of runs, I mean, the fact that you can now use breakout cables that go from Cat 6 and Cat 5 to XLR, I mean, that is like one wire in that XLR cable.
I know.
And so it's like...
And those are made for
It'd be
installs,
interesting to
by
really
the way.
look at...
Yeah, those are made to never move. Right.
Right, but the question is the audio quality. Do those lower the audio quality because it only has one strand? Is it presenting too much resistance in the signal? Is it somehow degrading the signal? And
And there's no transformers.
theoretically,
right?
yes.
There's no
Right,
transformers.
no transformers.
On the other end. It's just
No, you're
it's
just
a
using
breakout.
Cat 6 for its wires.
I
Yeah.
made those when I was a sound mixer. I was too cheap to buy a 100-foot long boom operator snake.
You're ahead of your
It was
time, man.
expensive cable, and I made a cat. I took a Cat 6 and made my own terminator, my own splitters. And it worked. It worked. And if it got ran over by a grip truck or forklift or whatever, who cares? There's a $30 Cat 5 cable. Another one, roll it out and back to work.
Do you know what else I found? I found a company that makes a thing that you can slide over the top of your Cat 5 connector to glue your tab back.
Well, there's also a
those
there's
break
a
all the time.
Neutrik Ethercon. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, it's like a XLR meets a
Yeah, it has the round
Ethernet
barrel
cable,
of an
yeah.
XLR connector, but on the
Yeah.
inside it's Ethernet. That's what the truly pro audio gear for touring and location. That's what they use. But-
Amphenol is the company I was trying to think
Oh,
of. I think.
Amphenol, yeah. I have
Amphenol,
used
yeah.
one
They
of
make
their
connectors,
solderless
yeah.
connectors. That was pretty cool. You just lay the wiring into a certain. It's very well designed.
Shig.
It's like pull your wires through these things and then screw it together, and boom, it's done. Yeah, good designs. That's Aussie, Australian, Amphenol.
I'm pretty sure Amphenol is Australian. Yeah.
It's not
I should
Austrian.
ask Captain
They
Google.
they were a lot bigger in like the 60s and 70s. You saw a lot of Amphenol connectors on.
Like cablechick.com.au is where I get mine. I'll be completely honest. She does great.
yeah?
It's it's not top of the line, but it's better than average. Fine.
I mean, are they fabricators? Are they building?
Yeah,
their
so
own
they
stuff? Is that
so
what it
you
is?
can custom ask them for one, or you can go onto their website and you can just buy stuff they've got there. But if you want to, I don't know, TRS to XLR.
So what I've done, every studio I've been at, when they do an install, they end up ripping out miles of really expensive, like multi-core cable.
Yeah, there you
And
go.
over the years, I just have a store of cable.
Yeah, good for you. Great idea.
Like, what do you need? And I got 8-channel, a 24-channel, and there's like buy the connectors you need and solder them on, just like Andrew.
Yeah. Can I just say I'm wrong? Amphenol is American.
Oh, well, there you go. So we don't have anyone here that makes
about
cable,
that.
No. Well, except for you, Robbo.
except for me.
Well, connectors or cable. I think there has to be a domestic cable company. There has to be.
There's got to be. No, there doesn't have to be here in Australia
There's gotta
because
be.
fuck knows we buy everything else from overseas. We never used to.
Yeah.
but-
We'd actually we'd just give some country all of our, minerals to make them and then buy them back because that's what we do.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that like the English colonial system?
We have some of the best. We have some of the best lobster in the world, right? We harvest it here, right? Then we send it overseas to be processed and buy it back frozen to sell it to our public.
So you're getting the worst product.
So you're getting stuff that's
just
been
get it
frozen
live.
off the instead of just buying it fresh, or whatever. It's like we're dumb. We really are. But anyway, that's a different story.
Yeah, we drink Florida orange juice in California, so figure that out.
There you go. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. You know what I'm talking about. You just scratch your head and go, how much more am I paying for this?
The whole buy local thing makes sense. It's like, even if we're just going to be kind to the planet, think about shipping like gobs of copper cable. Stuff weighs a lot, you know?
Absolutely.
And granted, now it's less because, you can do a lot with like Ethernet and multi-channel virtual snakes, but still, like cable is heavy.
It is indeed.
Can be heavy.
Indeed.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm not doing nearly as many installs as I used to where there was multiple analog signal paths, but I was a lot less picky about the 1/4-inch TRS, balanced cables, because they were usually very short runs. They were going 3 to 6 feet, and if it was much further, I usually would get a snake made that I would custom design. There's companies I could just say, put these connectors on these ends. Rapco, I think, was Rapco Horizon I used to make them. And it was nice.
Pro Audio LA, you can just go to their site and you just like click. It's like clicking through with what cable you want, and you know exactly how much it's going to be.
No, it was great. I'd say I want this connector on channel 1 and this on the other end, and I want it labeled like this, and it would show up in the mail, pre-made, pre-labeled, heat shrunk on each end with the labels and everything. It was awesome.
I did that for a summer. My job at this place that used to build TV trucks, you know how like a semi truck would pull up to a
big trucks.
football stadium. So they would design these things, and you would just get a spreadsheet with cable connector, like cable length connector A, connector B. And at the end of the hall was this wall of spools of cable, like all the way up and down, like just every 2-channel, 10-channel, and then a giant ruler on the floor. And you just spend your day all day going up, getting the cable running, cutting it, like soldering that thing down, like next cable. And then they would install these in the truck, and they were just like perfect lengths, like end to end.
That's great.
Like
That's
mapped
the
out.
best. Yeah.
But it's interesting though, isn't it? I mean, I for a while there, about a year or so ago, I romanticized about making my own cables when I was building this studio.
I remember.
But you know what? I'd love to be able to do it, but I've never really done it. And I went and bought the soldering iron. I bought the solder and the cables and the plugs and stuff. And the first one I made didn't work, and I took it back. And you know what? In the end, I thought, as a studio owner, I've got to build my studio. Then I've got to work and run the studio. Then I've got to do the accounts. Then I've got to do the marketing. Then I don't need to spend another 2 or 3 hours of my life, making cables and fixing cables. Fuck it, I'm just going to buy them. And you know what? Spend a decent amount of money and get a decent cable with some decent connectors on the end, and that's all you need. I mean, no, like we're not OB trucks with running 30, 40 meter runs of cable. Let's face it, the longest cable here in my studio is a 3 meter one that I thought it'd be nice to be able to have a microphone at the back of the room where I've got a little comfy chair to sit in to do my podcast from. I've never done it, but I ran a cable over there in case I wanted to, and that's the longest cable in my room. So
Yeah.
With a better than average cable, the quality that I'm losing is nothing really over those short runs. So that does me just fine.
I was going to say, I think if we do a shootout test, and if people are especially worried about, like, does oxygen-free cable and how many strands, I think that even the single wire in a Cat 6 cable is capable of enough current flow, because this isn't high voltage stuff. It's not like you're running your speakers through a Cat 6 cable. This is all line level and mic level stuff.
Very low voltage.
There's plenty of electrons in that, even that little piece of wire to get the signal through cleanly. I'm not sure that, but like one of the reasons why you want maybe a bunch of strands, it's so it's easier to deal with when you solder, and that it's more forgiving to stress. There's other reasons for it, but it doesn't have to be. I'll be perfectly honest. George, what do you do when you need speaker cable?
It's extremely unusual. I mean,
okay.
I know what you're going to say. Have you gotten lamp cord, 16 gauge lamp cord?
Fuck yeah, Home Depot lamp cord. There's your speaker cable.
Really?
Done.
Exactly.
Like, and of course,
16 gauge
it's
is
wire.
12 gauge maybe if you're running more like subs or something with a lot of power.
It's like, I'm just going to open up a store that goes to Home Depot and buys lamp cord and then sells it for twice as much with a label that says speaker cable on it.
I've certainly done that.
There you go.
But it's just so rare anymore. I deal with any speaker wiring. Everything's self-powered and everything is digital.
Yeah.
It's just there's so much less analog cabling anywhere. The last thing I wired.
But the point is, like, copper is copper.
Yeah.
It all conducts. It's like, don't.
The biggest problem,
let
the biggest problem in anybody's setup is not the cabling themselves. It's almost always the 1/4 inch
The connections.
jack, the
patch bay.
or wherever
Yeah.
it's patching into the board. That's where the problem is. And XLRs do a much better job of maintaining a good connection than TRS or 1/4 inch, because if you look at the way,
Do you know what does a great job is RCA?
yeah, well, there's a larger surface contact between the two conductors, right? With RCA and XLR, and XLR, you've got 3 pins. Each pin slides into a sleeve, But with a 1/4 inch,
like
there's a
locked in
tiny
with a
little
pin.
fingertip touching the side of the plug, right? And that gets corroded so easily. And all you have to do is twist it around in the socket, in the jack. Twist it around 20 or 30 times.
Or just unplug it 20 times.
Or do that. Yeah, twisting.
Exercise
we call it
it.
exercising the connector, right? Exactly. That's all the cleaning most anybody ever really needs to do on their setup.
Well, you can buy plugs that have a little bit of a sandy surface.
Can you?
Yeah, they make like cleaner plugs that are
Oh.
just like a little bit, like they'll go in
just
and
does it a
etch
lot
the
faster.
lifters. Yeah,
It
they
speeds up the
etches.
process. That's a good idea.
But yeah, no, it's funny how 1/4 inch patch bays are bigger, but they usually are flakier than TT patch
I
bays.
found that out the hard way, because when I built my remote truck in the late 90s, I wanted it to be easy. So I bought a 1/4 inch TRS patch bay. Both sides were TRS 1/4 inch, right? So, but on the road, sometimes a plug pulls out of that damn thing, shakes loose, gets partly disconnected, and then you're bringing up channels, and you're like, gosh, yeah.
I hate it when you're trying to bring the bay out of the rack and you're just like, please, everybody stay in. I only need to address one connector.
But 12 other cords come out.
Pop off.
Yeah.
Here's a patch bay nightmare story. I was wiring up a 144-point TT bay, which are these cool bays that have 2 rows of normals and then 1 row of like outboard
They
gear.
look like 1/4 inches, but half the size, like really small.
Yeah, teeny telephone. So I didn't have a heat shrink gun, but I had a hairdryer. And I was doing this right. And I did the whole thing. And I had all my heat shrink and I soldered everything down. It took me like 2 days, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I go through with I'm going to shrink it down now. I'm all done, right? And this hairdryer just like pops like a whole bunch of the solders.
Oh, really?
Really?
Too hot.
Oh,
yeah.
it's too hot.
Yeah.
Wow.
It shrank that, but it also just like,
What the fuck does it do to your
Desoldered
hair
the
then?
connectors.
Look at Robert's hair.
that's right. There's no
Nothing is
color
too
left.
powerful for that.
Drying your hair going, what the fuck's that smell? I can smell burning hair.
He could be on fire and his scalp wouldn't even feel it.
That's right.
His scalp.
That's because of the drugs.
Yeah, it could be that as well.
So
There's
yeah,
the eyebrows
just
anyway.
get cable that matches your need. If it's not going to break,
Yeah, and if there's 6,
don't be fooled by name brands.
if there's
Just
like
get a
4
good solid
different
cable.
quality of cables, buy maybe the one up from the bottom
middle.
or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was in a Best Buy, and they have this section of Best Buy called Magnolia, which is basically for suckers. And it's all the really expensive stuff. And they had this wall of HDMI cables, and they had a chart explaining the difference in quality. There was like 9 different grades of HDMI cables. Now, you don't understand what is carried over an HDMI cable, right?
Everything.
Data.
Digital. It gets there or not.
Data.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
It works
It's
or it
digital.
doesn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
They had 9 different grades of digital cables. I was like, oh my God.
When I worked retail, the pitches for Monster cable,
Yeah,
were
don't say that.
hilarious.
Monster cable.
I mean, the biggest upsell. Like
It's a big profit maker.
or not upsell. It's just like it's like popcorn. Like this cable is so much better because we have our like what's Monster Cable's trick? We make our own connectors.
Right.
Now it looks really high end because it's got a connector that's slightly designed. It looks fancy. It's got gold on the outside of it where it really counts.
Yeah. yeah. Especially if you lick it.
Well, that's another thing you brought up. I know we got to wrap this up soon, but I mean, there's also gold contacts that is a big upsell on some cables. But I've noticed that the majority of the pro audio cables and connectors that I've ever seen are not gold contact cables. No. So does that really freaking make a difference?
I think it's because gold doesn't tarnish or doesn't oxidize as much, and maybe that's why. But no, you're right.
I know someone who had rose gold contacts.
Oh.
And they saw the world through rose-coloured contacts.
Glasses.
Yeah. Look, it was cheap.
But at the end of the day, if it sounds good, it is good, folks.
Yeah,
is,
goals
exactly.
or not. Yeah. Brown cable.
Brown furry cable?
It sounds like shit. Actually, it's shit. Oh, bummer.
Robbo, does your cable float in water?
Yeah, it does.
Well, that was fun. Is it over?
The Pro Audio Suite, with thanks to Tribert. Recorded using Source Connect. Edited by Andrew Peters. And mixed by Voodoo Radio Imaging. With tech support from George the Tech Whittam. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and join in the conversation on our Facebook group. To leave a comment, suggest a topic, or just say g'day, drop us a note at our website, theproaudiosuite.com.